My name's Jack. I'm the founder of Cultra, a nutrient analytics software, and today we're going to be talking about nutrient timing. So each nutrient that a plant needs is taken up at a different rate at a different time throughout the growing season. We call this a nutrient uptake curve. So here we have nitrogen uptake and we have time throughout the growing season. In the beginning of the growing season, when the plants are small, they're only taking up nitrogen at a rate that's pretty low when they're in this like early vegetative state. But as they get into a more mature vegetative state, this ramps up. And then as they move into a reproductive state, it starts to flatten out. Now, we want to make sure that in this period of rapid uptake, the plant has exactly what it needs. So this is for nitrogen, right? We have pretty slow nitrogen uptake and then really fast nitrogen uptake at this specific time. So this key moment. It's a pretty long moment throughout like the mature vegetative state right before the plant switches into reproductive mode. And so each nutrient that a crop needs does a different function in the plant. So every nutrient has its own uptake curve because of the function of that nutrient in the plant and when that plant needs that function to turn on and to happen. So nitrogen, incredibly important for leaf growth and photosynthesis and pretty much all plant processes. It's going to be taking up nitrogen throughout the entire growing season. But then you have a couple other nutrients that may have different uptake curves because they have different, more specialized roles in the plant. And we're going to look at a few of those today. We're going to figure out how we can predict when this super high rate happens for each nutrient, how to check if we have enough nutrients available for the plants to really nail this heavy uptake section, and what to do if we don't. So every single nutrient has a different uptake curve based on its role that it plays in the plant. We need to make sure that we can nail these critical moments for each nutrient, and we're prepared for them using the tools we have available to us. So those are tools like testing and then also tools like the method of fertilizer application. So a quick example is if this is nitrogen uptake, we might see something like a potassium uptake curve just to show the difference between that different nutrients have different rates of uptake throughout the season. So a potassium curve is going to start out very similar to nitrogen, but it's going to be slightly different. It's going to be slightly steeper and then go up like this. And so managing for potassium and timing for that is going to be slightly different, but mostly similar. However, you may have other nutrients that are needed like this, and then they have a bump, and then they have another bump. We're gonna go through, we're gonna figure out how can we predict these key points, show what that nutrient does in the plant, and how we can predict that and be ready for it through both measuring and through actually fixing a problem if when we measure we see that there's a problem. Now if we have maximum nutrient availability at the entire time throughout the season, we have a large bank of nutrients, the plant can take this up no problem. But we want to make sure we're not misapplying fertilizer at different times and we're really nailing it instead of just relying on a classic calendar year model of how we know when to apply certain products. And that's what we're going to go over right now is how can we predict this? Because one year, this might be, June 1st, and another year, it might be June 15th. And if we think it's June 15th and it's actually June 1st, and we apply at this section, well, we've pretty much missed the boat because this nutrient's not going to be ready. It's not going to be mineralized and transformed in the soil until this time period. And we're already past that uptake curve. So we want to make sure we're applying or we're doing the correct thing at the correct time based on the differences in temperature and weather patterns each season, rather on solely relying on a key date. So if we're not relying on a key date, what are we relying on? We're relying on this concept called growing degree units. Now, a growing degree unit or growing degree day, they mean the same thing, is accumulated heat above a certain threshold over a period of time. So if you have certain temperatures early in the season that are warmer, you're going to have more accumulated growing degree units for that crop than if that spring was colder. So these are the accumulated units of heat that determine how fast or slow a crop is going to grow. So it's directly correlated to the crop's physiological development. So to calculate how many growing degree units happen in a day, we take the maximum temperature of that day and we add the lowest temperature of that day, divide it by 2, and then we subtract what's called a base temperature. This is the minimum temperature it takes for a crop to grow. So the crop grows based on the accumulated heat, not necessarily on time. So if we have an example, say we use corn, every single crop has a different base temperature, a different minimum temperature where that crop begins to start growing. So for corn, that's going to be 50. So when the temperature is above 50, the corn can grow. Say we have a day that is 65 degrees is the high, we're in the spring, and the lowest temperature is 40. So you have 105 divided by 2 is 52.5. So we have 52.5 minus 50, so we have 2.5 growing degree units accumulated that day. So if we have a graph where we have accumulated GDUs on the y-axis and time on the x-axis, and this is in the spring, and we plant right here, this is when we put the seeds in the ground, that's when we start this clock. Then on a day that has those temperatures, we would accumulate 2.5 growing degree units. So now let's expand that out throughout the season. We're going to have each one of these days is going to accumulate a certain amount of growing degree units. Most of the time in the spring, it's going to be in the single digits. It's going to go like this. And then as the temperature rises, maybe we have a hot day, then it levels out. We have another hot day, and then it's flat for when we get to colder seasons in the fall and winter. So this graph of accumulated GDUs is different every season because some seasons we have warm springs, some seasons we have cold springs. We can map the crop development phase, the physiological phase that a crop goes through, based on measuring these accumulated growing degree units. What that tells us is we can know when certain physiological changes, when certain physiological processes begin to happen in the plant based on measuring these GDUs. And we can take that and we know the specific role that a nutrient plays in a plant. And so we know that if a crop is going to begin a certain physiological process that requires a lot of a certain nutrient, we can predict when that nutrient timing is going to be most important. So we know that through research that crops begin to turn on certain physiological processes and go through certain development stages as they hit certain GDU milestones. Okay, so we're gonna go over an example of when we have the same, maybe the same planting date, but the ideal time for a nutrient application window is going to be different. So say we have a cooler spring instead of like a warmer or a normal spring. This rate is going to be slower in the early season, but now say we have a warmer spring. So maybe instead it begins to go up like this. We know the rate of uptake is higher when a plant hits a certain GDU threshold. So say that's 400, right? And we want to make sure that when that crop reaches a certain GDU threshold, the nutrients it needs for that physiological next stage is ready and it's there and it's about to be available to the plants because the plants are about to uptake a lot of them once we hit a certain threshold. These numbers are going to be not consistent with research, but it's just showing the overall concept. So say that number is 400. You know, a lot of times for corn, the emergence, like from planting to emergence, is around 120 GDUs, and there's a lot of literature to figure out exactly when each of those stages happen. But if we have this cold season, we have this warm season, we look at this cold season, hitting that 400 GDUs is significantly later, right? And this is going to be like days or weeks. So in this cooler season, we're going to hit this certain GDU threshold probably a couple weeks later than we would if it was a warm season. Now this dramatically impacts the application timing of key nutrients that are needed when a crop reaches a physiological level that's correlated with that accumulated GDU amount. So what that means tactically is if we're doing in-season applications, like a spray application or a fertigation application, we want to be watching this because we need to know that when a crop hits a certain GDU level, its uptake curve is going to change the rate. So it's going to go from less steep, so more like consistent nutrient uptake, to more steep. So it's going to pull a lot more nutrients in a shorter amount of time. And so it has a higher chance for that to exhaust the resources. If we don't know what we have, or if we have too little available to the plant, it could exhaust that, and then it can induce a plant stress, and then our potential yield is going to drop. So that piece is very key, is we're trying to eliminate potential yield drop by mistiming these nutrient applications so your crop has the nutrients that it needs when it needs it. It also is important that we don't mistime these fertilizer applications where that fertilizer could just go away because we applied it too early, the crop didn't need it, and then that nutrient volatilized or it leached out, or something like that. So we want to make sure we nail this. And we nail it not by going off a calendar date, but by going off of these accumulated GDUs. So if these are 2 weeks apart, and we know that if we're applying in furrow application or something in order to achieve the highest rate of plant availability, and we know that if we're doing a in-furrow application of some kind of granular fertilizer or something like that, and it takes a week or 2 weeks for that nutrient to mineralize and be available to the plants, then we need to time that correctly. If it's a cooler season, and we hit this a couple weeks later and we do our application here, right, then we've timed it correctly for the season for it to hit this 400 GDUs. It takes it up, it's awesome. But maybe what happens is we're not tracking this, or it's a warm season and we know we nailed it last season, and so we do that same exact timing date, but this season's different. This season it's a bit warmer, and we do the same thing. Then by the time that it's mineralized and is available to the plant and goes through that process in the soil, we're already past this key uptake window and your crop has already undergone a deficiency stress. And so that takes your yield, your potential yield, and it'll reduce it. So knowing when these key inflection points happen, knowing when our crop is going to physiologically progress on growth stages, and knowing what nutrients are required for each growth stage and what the rate of the uptake needs to be at each one of those growth stages for each of our nutrients is really important. So I'm going to go over a couple examples. So first, we need to know what we have, because maybe we don't need to make any kind of change, right? Like maybe all of the nutrients that are needed when it hits this are available in the soil and the crop can take them up and we're completely fine. But we don't know that unless we've been testing and we are looking at all of our data. All right, so say we take a plant sap analysis, with enough time to see what's going on so we can correctly time a nutrient application according to GDDs. So say we know we have increased rate of uptake at say like 600, and we've been mapping it out and we can kind of see that it's warmer than like the 5-year average. So we know we're going to test a little bit earlier, making sure we see if we're on track, because if we test at 600 and then we get our results back and oh no, we need to make some application, then that window is already passed. So we test here in the time, we get our test results back here, we're able to make our application and we nail it. And we do that through looking at the seasonal pattern, what's going on. And so with our plant sap test with a mobile nutrient, phosphorus, we have old leaves and new leaves. We want to know if the plant has root access to the nutrients, like can that plant continuously take them up, or is it having a hard time and it's needing to take from its own reserves from the older leaf. So what we're going to look at is the difference if your plant sap analysis says this at one of those key testing times, or if it looks like this, right? So if both the old and new are adequate and the crop's taking the nutrients up, then we're completely fine. We have all of this available nutrients if we run into an uptake issue at that key moment for the plant to use its nutrients. But if we see the plant's already been having to take nutrients from its older leaves to give it to its it's newer leaves with a mobile nutrient, then we know we need to do something, especially if we have one of these key moments of higher rates of uptake at that time. So that's how we can use something like plant sap analysis test to guide our in-season nutrient decisions. And again, we want to make sure we're doing that based on the accumulated heat units so we don't miss time or we don't miss a certain critical window by a couple weeks. So there's a bunch of research done on where these key moments are, like corn growth stages are incredibly well documented. All of the commodity crops are well documented. There's not as much documentation on physiological changes in those uptake curves for like higher value, more niche crops. But we can take some kind of ideas from that research and kind of put them onto a crop that might not have as much research or a nutrient that might not have as much research, like a micronutrient. So what can we do? What kind of data can we look at? Well, we first can look at the crop growth stages and the things that crop does during those stages. So generally most crops, they have 3 big stages. So we have an early vegetative state, a mature vegetative state, and a reproductive state. Now, these are critical moments, generally speaking, with different uptake rates. Now, if we know that, John Kempf has a ton of awesome research synthesizing this information from when you have a key moment in that crop's physiological cycle, like when fruits, I know he talks a lot about fruits have like a 2-week window where they have maximum cell division. And then you can look into that and say, okay, what's really important for maximum cell division? And then you can go back and say, okay, when does that maximum cell division happen? Right, at some point at this key moment between when it's leafing out and when it's beginning to reproduce. Now, we know that certain micronutrients are very, very important for this piece right here. So we know that's a critical point. And then we can see that GDDs, we can map that onto these major critical inflection points in a crop's physiological cycle. So then we can know which nutrients are needed by which nutrients we know play certain roles in a plant, and when those roles get turned on by tracking the accumulated heat units. So here on this x-axis, we have growing degree days, or growing degree units. These are going to be accumulated throughout the season. And so I have this broken up into 3 large categories of crop physiological growth stages: early veg, mature veg, and reproduction. A lot of crops follow that kind of physiological stage. Crops like corn and soybeans that have way more research done on them have each of these broken up into many more stages. But generally, the plant is going to have early establishment and then rapid growth and then move to reproduction. And each nutrient has different uptake curves and are needed at different levels in this order of these stages. And we can guess using the accumulated GDDs when this will happen, and then we can therefore guess when certain nutrients are needed. So if we have a certain nutrient that goes from this kind of lower rate uptake in the early vegetative state and then goes upwards to this higher rate, and then when it enters in the reproductive growth stage, it kind of flattens or begins to decline. We want to make sure that we time this really high rate correctly and we have enough resources available to the plants so that they don't accidentally not take up this amount and they only take up a little, and then we have crop loss. Now, what's really cool is when we're entering into this reproductive stage, we want to make sure that, as we're getting to what's often harvested and collected, that's being maximized. So based on these 3 stages, we can make certain assumptions that allow us to make management decisions that make the most sense for us so we don't accidentally get yield loss that's preventable. So say we do 100% of the crop's nitrogen requirement at pre-plant, right? Maybe when it goes from this flat lower uptake to this rapid growth, maybe it's not fully being used. And so that's why doing in-season applications, if possible, make more sense, and you can time it to where the mineralization rate of that nutrient that you're applying is available to your crop exactly when it's needed. Okay, so a quick recap. Each nutrient has different rates at different times throughout a crop's life cycle. And understanding the role of each nutrient in the crop is helpful for us to be able to time nutrient applications correctly with the crop's growth stage in mind. And we can know when crops hit critical points based on a lot of research into growing degree days, growing degree units tied to that crop developmental stage. So we have growing degree units. This is what triggers plants to develop physiologically. This is calculated by taking the maximum temperature plus the minimum temperature, dividing by 2, finding that average daily temperature, and then subtracting from the base value, which is different for every single crop. Now we have growth stage. So the crop growth stage follows the crop growing degree units. Those growth stages have key inflection points that change the nutrient uptake curve, so we can understand when each nutrient is needed more at a higher rate with those key inflection points. And we can predict those key inflection points not by the calendar year, but by accumulated growing degree units. And we have uptake curves. So this is the rate at which nutrients are needed by the plant throughout the growing season at each growth stage. Now with Cultra, our aim is to make this process a lot easier. So we're a nutrient analytics platform, and we are very close to being able to accumulate growing degree days for you. So when you put in, I'm growing this crop, we can scour the internet and all of the research papers about that crop in the region, be able to pull your local weather data and then accumulate those growing degree days and be able to show you, hey, this growth stage is coming up next based on your local weather. So because every single season is different, every year is different, you're gonna have different weather patterns, we wanna make sure we're timing things correctly based on the crop's physiological growth stage and growing degree units rather than just by calendar year, so we can maximize hitting these uptake curves as perfectly as possible, and we can minimize any potential yield loss due to mistiming. I hope this video was enjoyable and had a lot of value for you. Thank you so much for watching.